Yay, welcome back. All right, and this is Pop Politics. So let's get started. Let's dive right into pop culture, where we always start, because it's called Pop Politics. And so, the first item on our list has to do with a singer by the name of Beyonce. You might have heard of her.
I've heard of her, maybe.
Maybe.
You haven't.
Maybe.
Under a rock.
So...
That's okay.
So, Beyonce hopped on to a Spanish track to give support for hurricane relief. So, the song is called Mi Gente. It is by J Balvin and Willie William. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's kind of like the new Despacito. Like, it's in Spanish, and it's kind of like that reggaeton, like... Yeah. So, it's like the new Despacito.
There's already a new Despacito?
Yeah, it's the new Despacito. But...
That one's not that old.
I know. Okay, side note, I really don't like this Mi Gente song. It has, like, a weird, like, French beat or something. But anyways, Beyonce hopped onto it. They did a remix with Beyonce. She sings in Spanish, and they're doing it for hurricane relief. And so, of course, the internet was like, oh my gosh! Because, you know, whenever Beyonce even breathes, the internet freaks out.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting that they're doing this. Also, I guess kind of while we're on hurricane relief, Lin-Manuel Miranda's putting together, like, a huge list of Puerto Rican stars, and they're releasing a song tomorrow, which will be Friday when we're recording this, so we'll talk more about that next week. Also, the One America Appeal, the one with, like, all the 5 living presidents, they're throwing, like, this big concert in Texas, and all 5 of the former presidents are going to be there.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool. This will be the first time they've all appeared in public together since the opening of George W. Bush's library in 2013.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's been, like, 4 years since they've all publicly appeared together.
Well, and on a side note on the President's Day, it was Jimmy Carter's, 93rd birthday
was it?
This week? I'm going to go look that up now. Yeah, I saw something about that.
That man.
So...
He won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Since it's Nobel Week, I was looking at, like, the past winners, and he was...
Did you know that one of the recipients of this year's Nobel Prize in Physics is actually a native of Logan?
I did.
Logan High graduate.
Yeah, Logan High graduate. He didn't go to USU, but his parents taught here. And his dad is D. Winthorne, who actually is... his name is on the highest research award that we give to faculty members. Wow. Every year we give it to one faculty member every year.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, are you getting that Jimmy Carter?
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Good old Jimmy Carter. He's had a really good post-presidency, I feel like. He was a one-term president, and he wasn't, like, super popular when he was in, but he's done a lot. And to win a Nobel Peace Prize is, like...
It's a big deal.
Probably the highest honor you could receive.
Yeah, October 1st.
Oh, good job, Jimmy Carter. So the thing about one-term presidents, there's the side note, like, it's actually more common, and we don't recognize this because we've only grown up with 2-term presidents, but it's actually more common for presidents to serve one term rather than 2. Yep. Because, like, before Trump, the past 3 presidents all were 2-term presidents. Clinton, Bush, Obama. Right. So, yeah, anyone our age, like, it's just...
Right, but H.W. was a one-term president. Carter was a one-term president.
Ford was basically because he didn't win re-election.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's more common to be a one-term president in the history of our presidency than 2-term. Yeah. We just tend to remember the 2-term presidents or the 4-term presidents.
Yeah, FDR, we see you. Also, one tiny little side note, who was the last American, trivia for you, who was the last American to win the Nobel Peace Prize?
The last American to win the Peace Prize? I don't know.
It was Barack Obama in 2009.
Really? What did he win it for in 2009?
You know, there was a little bit of controversy because it was only like 11 months into his first term.
Yeah.
So, like, he hadn't really done anything. I can't remember the citation, but it was about, like, fostering international diplomacy and, like, something like that.
Huh. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Did you know that Trump and Putin were both nominated for the Peace Prize this year?
Their odds were, like, really slim.
Really slim.
But yeah.
Well, because you just have to be a qualified nominator to throw a name in.
I read that.
And it was like, really?
And there's, like, quite a few people. Like, anybody in government, any past Nobel laureate can nominate somebody.
Yeah, so you don't really have to, like... So then they just narrow it down to, like, people who can actually be considered. There's a really good, like... list of the top, I don't even know how many possible winners on Washington Post.
Yeah. Maybe we'll link to it.
Yeah.
The Nobel Peace Prize will also be announced tomorrow, Friday, so we'll also talk about that next week.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Now,
Trivia night's over.
a little bit into bizarre or pop culture news. Taco Bell, the restaurant, is releasing a clothing line. And when I saw this headline, I was like, wait, what? So they're releasing it through a new partnership with Forever 21. And this article I'm reading says, your wardrobe is about to get saucy. Hot saucy, that is.
Saucy?
Wow.
Wow. Oh my.
So they're teaming up with Forever 21. It's available in stores and online starting October 11th. And they will feature items such as bodysuits, which I don't even know is that supposed to be like rompers? I think that's like rompers, like full. I think that's supposed to be like a romper type thing.
Okay.
Anyways, hoodies,
I wouldn't want one
sweatshirts,
from
and
Taco
graphic
Bell.
tees. So
Why?
So
Taco
you
Bell,
know,
stick to food.
I don't know. I bet it'll sell. People, and like,
I'm
especially
sure it
teens,
will.
They're
Which is the
It'll
most
sell.
disappointing part.
with Forever.
Olivia will buy it all.
Oh man, with Forever 21 too, they're definitely targeting to their right audience. So props to them.
Okay. All right, we're moving off of that. That's a little.
Okay, so a while back we talked about how they were reviving American Idol, and then they announced that they were having Katy Perry be the first judge, and Ryan Seacrest was coming back. Well, this week they announced the rest of the judges.
Oh.
So the other two judges are Lionel Richie and Luke Bryan. So you've got Katy Perry from pop, Lionel Richie like from old school pop and like the grandpa of pop music pretty much.
Yeah.
And Luke Bryan's country. So they've
Yeah.
got like an interesting panel. I don't know. I'm still like, the original was the original and it's way too soon to revive. They only took it off the air like a year and a half ago. It's just, I don't know. But at least they got Ryan Seacrest back. So it just would be weird without him.
Huh.
Okay. Moving on.
Yeah.
So speaking of music and singers, this week it was reported. Okay, this is crazy.
It's a weird
So
story.
this is about Tom Petty, the singer from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. So it was reported that he died. I can't remember what day it was.
I don't remember
Was it, like,
either.
Tuesday?
It was in
was
in
it
the mix
Monday?
of the whole Las Vegas thing.
Yeah.
Like it was so
I think it was
everything
Monday.
I think it was Monday because everything was like rolling in about Las Vegas and we were so worried about that, and then on top of it you had this like report that Tom Petty had died.
And yeah, and then everyone was starting to do like the traditional, like,
The
oh, we
traditional,
love him,
yeah.
tributes, and then like reports are like, oh wait, no, he's not dead yet.
He was in the hospital.
He's in the hospital, and that was like mid-afternoon, midday.
And then later that
And then
evening,
in the evening, they're like, okay, he's dead.
he's actually dead.
And
And I don't think that
It
well,
was
and I
like
didn't-
this weird whiplash, like, what is going on?
Well, and from what I understood, he wasn't in the hospital.
Really?
I don't know. I may have to go look at the story because I was reading a story and it sounded like he wasn't in the hospital, question mark.
I thought he was in the
I don't
hospital.
I don't know. It just said that he suffered from cardiac arrest.
Interesting.
So-
But it was like the weirdest, like, he's dead, no he's not, he is, he's in the hospital, like what? And
Like everybody's caught up in it. Nobody knows what's going
right. And I think that just like attests to, you know, when you're in a crisis, the news is like super unreliable. Like there are so many times when like when they're in a crisis, the news, like so much is happening so fast, like the reporting is a little bit wrong. It's a little bit off at the beginning, and then over time, like things start to get clear. I remember in the Sandy Hook shooting, they originally reported it was the shooter's brother who was the reporter or the shooter, and he was like at his job like that day, just
Well,
like
in
working.
Las Vegas, they originally reported it was someone, or there was fake news that it was someone else, and this poor guy like had his name completely slandered before it came out that it was who it was, right? And so that does happen quite frequently. Oh, so you were right. He did die in the hospital.
Okay.
So I had read that he suffered from cardiac arrest in his home and just assumed that he didn't go to the hospital, but he died at the UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles a day after he suffered, and we were right. It was Monday. So
Okay. Good.
yeah.
Okay, so that was weird. The next thing that we have on our list is the unified bid for the World Cup. So that is Mexico, Canada, and the United States are bidding for the 2026 World Cup.
Yeah, we were talking about.
And
Forgot about that.
yeah, we talked about that. And they're starting to put together a list of host cities. And so they narrowed it down to 32 cities.
Okay.
And Salt Lake City was on the list.
Oh, that's good.
They made the list. So Now, this is an
Rio
official...
Tinto, is it good?
They're actually thinking of doing it at Rice Eccles Stadium, where the University of Utah plays, yeah. Not Rio Tinto.
Why?
But Rice Eccles holds more.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And so, yeah, but Salt Lake's on the list. Now, it's not official. They still have to trim it down a little bit more, but Salt Lake is a candidate. So that's cool. So they narrowed it down to 32 cities, and this will be, in 2026, will be the first World Cup where they have 48 teams. Usually, I think they do 32, but they're expanding it. And so this one is the first one to have 48. So there's going to be 80 games, and this is how they're splitting up. It's real even. The U.S. will host 60 games, and Canada and Mexico will each host 10.
No!
I'm like, if we're going to do that, we might as well just host it all ourselves.
Yeah.
Like,
that's ridiculous.
I know, it's like, oh, we're going to have this huge, like, turkey. You can both have, like, a tiny little piece.
You can have a wing.
You can have a wing. Right? I mean...
Ridiculous.
Obviously, the United States has more sports infrastructure, more stadiums, so we have more cities capable of hosting. But, yeah, it seems very...
Like,
very
we're
rude.
The country that leads the revenue the least.
Yeah, it seems like very rude and very like, oh, we're the best.
Yeah.
So we get to host them all. But whatever.
Okay. All right. So the last piece of pop news is actually like a kind of a crossover a little bit. So I was reading the news last week, just humbly dum on Friday morning. As you do, yeah. Like first thing in the morning. That's what I do is I read the news. And I was reading and this story caught my eye. And apparently there were faux Lego sets on store shelves in Singapore that were ISIS Lego sets, like ISIS John or Jihadi John and stuff like this. And I was just like, what? Like, this is the exact this is the Lego set you really want to give to your child. Like, this is good.
Here,
so they were pulling them off. Oh my gosh. They were pulling them off the shelves in Singapore, and I don't think that they were anywhere else. Not that from the thing that I could that I was reading, not from the report I was reading, but
Singapore. That's super random.
Yeah. So let's recruit from Singapore. I'm sure that just went through ISIS's mind, collective mind.
Scary. Wow.
Yeah, it was very interesting. On that lovely note, we will leave pop and move to politics. So last week we talked about Tom Price and his chartered flights and how he was going to write a check for $51,000 for his seat on a chartered plane that also carried his staff to repay the American people. And there was a history of chartered flights, from what I understand. It's rampant through the Trump administration, so I think it's funny that only Price has been the one that's really been hit by it.
Right. I've seen Elaine Chao, Rick Perry.
Mnuchin was the last number I saw was 800,000 in chartered flights. Really? Yeah. So, but on Friday, we talked about him maybe resigning because Trump was upset with him. On Friday, he actually did resign. So we were doing some research, and he's the first official cabinet member to have resigned during the Trump presidency. And because Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, isn't actually a cabinet position.
So, Tom Price went from, as Stephen Colbert said, private jet to private citizen.
Yeah.
So, I also think this brings up something interesting. Now there are 2 open vacancies in the cabinet.
Yeah.
Homeland Security hasn't gotten a nominee since John Kelly went to Chief of Staff, and now Health and Human Services, which John Kelly's been Chief of Staff for a good 2 months now. Yeah, he's been Chief. Yeah. Elaine Duke is the acting, but I've heard rumors that Trump is going to nominate her for the official position, but they haven't come out and said anything yet, and so
it's been interesting too because Homeland has they enacted the new travel ban during this time. Yeah. They went through and they did that, and she's been testifying in front of Congress. I was doing some research for a paper that included some Homeland stuff, and it's been really interesting. I was reading a lot of her statements, and she seems really as much as you can defend the Trump administration policy, she's really articulate and really well put together. So I wouldn't be surprised.
The thing that gets me is during the transition and during the first few months when all the nominees were getting confirmed and having hearings.
Yeah.
the administration berated the Democrats for blocking their nominees and not putting them through and not confirming them. And Sean Spicer, like, almost every press briefing, like, went on to tirade about how Senate Democrats are blocking him. This is the longest confirmed, nominee. Yeah. And now, like, they're not even nominating somebody. They're just letting it sit open for 2 months. That just seems, like, contradictory to me. Like, they blasted the Senate Democrats. Okay, but do you expect
anything less from this administration?
No, but it just seems because like they harped on that so hard. You feel like they would, like, be like, oh, we were so concerned about cabinet nominees then, and now they're just like, whatever. Like,
now we're dealing with a whole bunch of crises.
Now, like, she can just be acting. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I get you completely. I have stopped being surprised at the hypocrisy.
Yeah. I should say I'm not surprised. It's interesting. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how long Health and Human Services is open, too. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next thing is Puerto Rico, that is still recovering from the absolute devastation that was left in the wake of Maria. We talked last week about how they don't have power. There are a lot of hospitals that are not able to give life-saving treatments to people and stuff like that. The death toll rose this week from, I don't remember what, but I think it's up to 34 now. But this weekend, so the San Juan mayor has been her name is Carmen Yulín Cruz, and she has been very vocal about the lack of response from the administration and how, like, the supplies, it's not coordinated enough to get the supplies that is waiting in the docks to the people. I've been very vocal about this, and just said, we're dying. Like her emotional plea was, we're dying. I'm not playing politics here. We are actually dying, and we need help. And so she's been on the news a lot trying to get that help for her people, but also out in the streets, like walking through chest high water, trying to find people who have been trapped. Anyway, so Trump lashed out at her this weekend.
As he does.
Yeah, and it was just really disappointing. I mean, you expect more of him, especially especially when treating someone who is working so hard on a project, and he, like, just the way that he's treating the Puerto Rico, like, the disaster that is Puerto Rico is just, like, you kind of look at him and go, where's your human empathy and sympathy and decency? Because it's not present. He's been attacking the mayor, who's doing so much to help her people. He was praising the governor for a little bit, but finally the governor's kind of like, dude, half the stuff you're saying isn't actually happening.
And so Trump went to Puerto Rico on Tuesday for a visit, and there were some notable things.
Oh, man.
He had a meeting, kind of like a brief, with, like, all the leaders, and it basically was kind of like that one cabinet meeting where they, like, all went around and praised Trump. It's in similar vein to that. Like, we're doing so well, we're doing so good, we're doing so good.
I give us an A+. He said, I give us an A+ on Florida and Texas, and I would also give us an A in Puerto Rico, which is not accurate.
Yeah. So there's that. He also went to a church and was handing out supplies, but he was, like, throwing paper towels into the crowd as if they were t-shirts at a basketball game. Like, you get a paper towel and you get paper towels. And it was just like, also, it was so Trump. And then he met with, like, people with residents at their homes, and as he was leaving,
he said, have a good time.
Yeah, have a good time.
Their house has been destroyed.
They have no electricity.
Well, and then he went, and he was like, in that first meeting, he was like, you've thrown our budget all out of whack. And then he said, and he congratulated them on their lack of a high death toll. Oh, and he said that, you're doing much better than a real disaster like Katrina. And I was like, are you saying Puerto Rico in the wake of Maria isn't a real disaster? Like, yeah, that's not accurate. There are a lot of things this week that I just kind of looked at Trump and was like, you're supposed to be a unifier and also providing help to what is a U.S. territory.
All right, so it was interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
So, okay, next on the list, speaking of Trump, we need to talk about him.
Trump Tillerson, North Korea?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with the
North Korea tweet stuff, and then we'll do the
So
embassy
Sunday morning,
stuff.
I wake up, I just, trolling Twitter, as you do.
As you do.
And I read the news on weekdays, and I troll Twitter on weekends, on mornings. Now you know what my morning routine is like. So I wake up to this tweet. He says, I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he's wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man. It's improved from Rocket Man to Little Rocket Man. Oh, wow. And then he says, save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done. And I just sat there and was like, he said what? Because Tillerson had come out and said that
he was in Beijing.
Yeah, he was in Beijing saying that he was having he had diplomatic ties, and they were having talks with North Korean diplomats trying to come to like some sort of something. We're not even sure what the talks were about or what the subject was, but Trump is actively undermining, and I've been listening to a lot of not just pundits but like actual history people, like people who study nuclear history and know this stuff, and our history, and they've been saying that this is unprecedented. Like, they don't use that word lightly. This has never happened where a president has so openly undermined his Secretary of State. I was listening to Corey Shockey, listening to Deep State Radio, I think it was Corey who said that usually that stuff happens behind back doors. So, like, if a secretary says something that the president doesn't approve of or doesn't like, they'll call up the secretary and say, I need you to do something about this. I need you to take this back, so that, so that they'll have to eat some crow later. But it doesn't happen in the forefront like this. And also, like, just with something like that, that what North Korea is hearing from something like that is we are willing to nuke you. We are willing to shoot a missile at you, and we will take you out, and we will end up in war because we're no longer willing to negotiate. It's a very dangerous, very, very dangerous statement. I follow somebody. His name is Jeffrey Lewis, and he's a professor at Middlebury College, and he's actually a North Korean nuclear expert. And he simply said on Sunday, he retweeted this tweet by Trump and said, "Stop helping." Like straight up. I mean, it's just, I can't emphasize enough how dangerous that is, and it was really disappointing. But then later this week, I don't know, have you read more about? I know a little bit of the story, but have you read more about the Tillerson comments? So then later this week, he undermined Tillerson, or there's a story that came out about Tillerson, right?
Yeah, Trump. So it came out in NBC News that there was a report, it's all anonymous sources, so take that for what it's worth, but that Tillerson this summer got really angry at Trump and threatened to resign in the summer right after around his speech to the Boy Scouts. Because Tillerson is like a former president of the Boy Scouts of America and has ties to them. So it came out that he threatened to resign, but then this report in NBC, this is all in this NBC News report, and that Vice President Mike Pence came in and intermediated and told him to stay, and they were also supposedly had a conversation about whether Nikki Haley was helpful or hurtful to the administration. Yeah. And that that Tillerson called Trump a moron at a meeting at the Pentagon. So, all these things, all these allegations, things that supposedly happened, and that was quite a big blow to Tillerson and the State Department and the White House. That is not a good PR.
No.
That is not good
Absolutely
press.
Not.
So then, all of a sudden, Tillerson is having an impromptu news conference, which Tillerson never does. He hardly ever holds regular news conferences, let alone impromptu news conferences. So he hates talking to the press. So this was very rare, very abnormal. Right as he's starting, Trump tweets that NBC News report is fake news. Yeah. So Trump tweets that right as he's starting. Tillerson comes out, refutes everything except when asked specifically if he called Trump a moron, he said I'm not going to deal with petty things like that.
Yeah, I'm not from here, and we don't do that from where I'm from. And where I was listening to the BBC News report, and the BBC reporter was he just kind of said, actually, you have to remember that Tillerson was the CEO of ExxonMobil, so he probably does know how to deal in these little political fight things. So he really is just avoiding the question and opening up more questions on that topic.
But then the State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert came out emphatically during her briefing and said, no, he doesn't use that kind of language. He didn't call Trump a moron.
Yeah.
So take that for what it's worth. So it's just kind of been this interesting, like, palace intrigue, what's going on thing.
Yeah. But and in a week full of, like, actual crises that the administration has had to deal with, it's just interesting that these really shoot yourself in the foot things are coming to light as well.
Yeah.
They're dealing with real crises, and now they're having to deal with their self-inflicted ones, too. Okay, so foreign moments.
Now let's go on a foreign moment.
Let's see, what do we have this week? Okay, so the first thing is that the U.S. has expelled about 15 Cuban diplomats from the Cuban embassy in the United States because, as a result, and I don't think we've talked about this before, but as a result of hearing loss and cognitive actual brain damage, physical brain damage to a certain number of our own diplomats because of, like, some sort of sonic device. We still haven't been able to figure out what the heck is causing this, but it's quite a bit of people in our embassy in Cuba that have been suffering from this, and it started just after Trump was elected in November. And the Guardian, no U.S. that I have been able to find, no U.S. entities are reporting this, but the Guardian, a UK news source, is reporting that the people who were first hit by these sonic attacks and the hardest hit, the ones that have the most damage, they are actually U.S. intelligence officers, so probably CIA, which we're not reporting. We would never, it's very unlikely that we would report that, but it's just very interesting that's showing up in British news. So I don't know how much of that is factual and how much of it isn't, but it is factual that we have some diplomats that are currently suffering from cognitive disorders and hearing loss that is not healable. It's permanent.
And the State Department has been very cagey. Like, when this first came out, they were like, oh, we're not going to talk about it, no. And then they, like, slowly came out and said things. Mm-hmm. From what I've seen and from what they've said, they're not officially blaming Cuba, as the state. Right. They're saying that Cuban nationals probably were involved, but they're not blaming Cuba as a state.
Right, and so the sonic attacks were taking place near the embassy, but also in the neighborhoods where our diplomats are living. And so it's very interesting, and it sounds like they have gotten more sophisticated over time. So at first, people were reporting actually hearing a noise, and now they just report having the symptoms later. So it's actually a pretty interesting story.
And the U.S. expelled some Cuban diplomats.
Right.
From the United States.
And it's equivalent. It's about 15. It was equivalent to the number of people we had to remove from our embassy in Cuba.
And they're not saying, it's weird, they're not saying it was retaliatory action, but that they were still, like, saying, the State Department is saying, like, because they failed to keep our people safe, we're doing this. So, but how can it not be seen as retaliatory? Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like they're saying, this isn't retaliatory, but it really is. That's the feeling I got, like. Yeah. How could it not be seen as that when it was, like, directly as a result of that?
You know, I don't know.
You know what I mean?
We'll have to watch that a little bit. Yeah, it is a little bit weird, and a lot of people are drawing the dots anyway and saying, of course, this is as a result of this. So it's very interesting. So the other thing, it's kind of a side note. There are a couple other things, but this one's kind of a side note. So the UN, there was a draft report that was leaked. They make up a list of what they call child killers every year, and it's usually, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's groups, sometimes it's states. This year, Saudi Arabia is actually on the list of child killers, the UN list of child killers, because of how they are working in Yemen and treating Yemenis, and they are actually, there are a lot of children over there in that war that are dying as a result of the lack of medical care, because Saudi Arabia is choking off a lot of access to Yemen, and so they are on that list this year, which is really interesting.
Should we go to Catalonia next?
Yes. So the last thing is the referendum, an independence referendum, but not the one we've talked about because I like it so much for the last couple of weeks. It's the one at Catalonia from Spain, and this is the one that it's
super interesting.
It's super interesting and a little bit worrisome. One of my friends who just recently finished up a master's program in Russian studies at Oxford recently, and we were talking today, and she said, this one just gives me stomach acid because Catalonia is a northern region. It's a northeastern region of
where Barcelona
Spain,
is.
right? It's where Barcelona is, but it's the economic heart of Spain.
Right.
So they're actually the core. They're a lot of the revenue that Spain brings in, and they're a lot of more the elite, the social elite. And this weekend they held a referendum of independence, and it overwhelmingly passed, but in going to the polls, the Spanish government tried to crack down on this.
Oh, they sent in their whole national police force, and they were, like, beating protesters. Like,
they were shooting rubber bullets.
It was bad.
It was bad.
It didn't look good on behalf of the government.
Right.
So, and the Spanish government...
But it makes perfect sense, just because...
They're trying to clamp down on it.
You lose your biggest economic sector,
right.
then you are gonna... I mean, it's unconstitutional.
Right.
It's against the Constitution of Spain.
Well, Catalonia is... They have their own language. There's a... Catalan is a language separate from Spanish. They have their own flag. Like, they really have, like, their own separate cultural identity apart from the rest of Spain. Spain, if you've studied, actually has a lot of these, like, regions, lots of different languages.
Yeah, because
there's the Basques in the north.
And the Basques have tried independence in the past, but they haven't in recent years.
So... But the Catalonian government hasn't officially declared independence yet.
But they're saying they are going to.
Right now, they're like saying they're open to talking with the Spanish government, like having mediations and negotiations.
But the Spanish king has said we're not open to that.
Then the Spanish king came out and said he had been silent up to this point, and said Felipe came out and said no, like what they're doing is against the law, against the Constitution, against our national unity. So, like, the Catalonian government is trying to, like, appeal for help. The EU said, this is a Spanish problem. Like, we back the Spanish government.
Right, and then the UN just doesn't want to get involved. Like, that, especially for one of their member nations. Like, they just don't want to get involved.
And the EU is not getting involved either because there are other separatist groups within the EU. They just don't want to, like, start this chain. So the EU basically said, this is a problem for Spain. Like, you deal with it. We back the Spanish government, but that's it.
Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with them. They're pretty intent on
I was reading something interesting.
Oh, yeah?
The Spanish government, so the Prime Minister Rajoy, he has... there's a provision in the Spanish Constitution that gives the Prime Minister emergency powers to basically take over a region. So he can enact these emergency powers, go in, push all the leaders out, take over like their newspaper, their media, take over their police force, take over all their leadership, and basically like take over the government of that region.
That's interesting.
And so people are like, okay, so like what's he gonna do? Like they're very violent and very pushy with like sending the police force in, but they're wondering, are they going to go the step further and take over the regional government? Yeah. So isn't that like so fascinating?
That is fascinating.
The Constitution provides him that emergency power.
Yeah. Like, so this is actually, in some ways, the inverse of the Kurdistan referendum, because the Catalans are in a position to choke off funds to the main government, where the Kurdish government isn't. They're a financially stable position by themselves, but they don't fund the government, and so the Catalans have a little bit more leverage. I don't know how much that leverage will do for them. I think I see the Catalan independence movement, the Catalonia independence movement, as actually more futile than I see the Kurdistan referendum movement, just because like Spain is such a established country, and if that were to destabilize and fall apart, then...
But Spain has always had like a national unity problems. Like they've never really been... There's always been factions.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that, but if you were to have Spain completely disintegrate as a nation state,
that would be
would have it would have huge worldwide ramifications, where if Iraq were to completely disintegrate, there would be ramifications, but they wouldn't be the same. They wouldn't be to the same level, right? And the United States is so involved in Iraq that while some parts may fall to ISIS right away, but there wouldn't be a lot of it because the Kurds are actually pretty well organized, and the U.S. is on the ground there pretty heavily. And side note on ISIS in Iraq, actually, Hawija was freed yesterday. It was the last major ISIS, like major urban ISIS strongholds. Thank you, in Iraq. So that's pretty exciting news. There are just little pockets here and there left in Iraq now. So we'll see what happens. We're keeping an eye on those two referendums. It'll be interesting to see how or who actually does what and who declares independence. There's been some activity from Iran on the Kurdish referendum this week too, so it wasn't big, but they're trying to work with Turkey, which just never happens. So that's interesting.
All right, we'll move on to our biggest chunk of this discussion. This is the Las Vegas shooting.
Yeah.
So it came out, this was Sunday night, and then the news started basically really hitting Monday morning.
Yeah, I first heard about it Sunday night, right as I was going to bed.
Really? I didn't hear about it till Monday morning.
Yeah.
So, basically, just a quick rundown. There's a country music festival called the Route 91 Harvest Festival.
Something like that, yeah.
Big outdoor country music festival, like Jason Aldean was performing, just like a big country music festival in Las Vegas.
Right.
A shooter got up into the Mandalay Bay Hotel.
It was like the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel.
Busted out the windows and then started shooting down onto this crowd of people for several minutes.
And it sounded like automatic rifle fire.
Yeah, it was
it didn't sound like a semi-automatic weapon. It sounded very much like an automatic weapon, which was really concerning to a lot of people just because fully automatic weapons actually are illegal for sale, and so it's been a big part of the investigation to kind of figure out what kind of guns he did have.
What are the updated numbers?
So we're at 50...
Is it 58 or 59?
58 or 59 dead. I was trying to find the article.
And just under 500 injured.
Yeah, just under 500 injured.
And
over 300 of those have been released from the hospital at this point.
And for context, this is the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history.
In modern American history. That's very important to say because there are actually worse historical shootings with respects to white men shooting in African Americans and white men shooting
Indians,
Native Americans. Right.
But like this is worse than Sandy Hook. This is worse than Virginia Tech.
This is worse than Orlando, which was the last mass shooting.
That's true.
Yeah. Did you see that tweet that was floating around that was like, this is the third time I've heard this heading, that this is the worst mass shooting in modern American history. He said first it was Virginia Tech, then it was Orlando, and now it's this. I'm only 22. And I was like, that's true. Like, I'm only 21. And that's... I've also seen that heading 3 times.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So the... naturally, as after every mass shooting, there has been renewed talk of gun control and gun control legislation. Now, the Trump administration has been like relatively quiet about this. Trump, the candidate, was very pro-gun, very pro-Second Amendment, had the backing of the National Rifle Association, the NRA, aka like the most powerful lobby in the world. So, but Trump, the president, has said very little about gun control. So, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, when asked, and basically everyone in the administration, when asked the past few days, has said, now's not the time to talk about it. We'll get into discussions later. Trump has said, we'll talk about that later.
The very interesting thing is, so this man had, I don't even remember the numbers of guns anymore. It was so many guns. It was over 30. And he had altered quite a few of them. They were semi-automatic rifles. He had altered them with something called bump stocks, which
those things are crazy.
Yeah, from what I understand, I don't fully get it. I'm not a gun person, so
neither.
Don't quote me on this. But from what I understand of these bump stocks, you take off like the back half of the rifle and you replace it with this bump stock, and basically it turns it into it shoots at the same rate as an automatic weapon. Did you listen to the daily episode about this? So the daily episode about this, the guy who is a gun expert makes it very careful that he makes this distinction. It's not an automatic weapon when you add this bump stock. It just functions the way that an automatic weapon would.
And so everyone's like, if automatic weapons are banned... No, not everyone. A lot of people are saying, the rhetoric around is like, so if automatic weapons are banned, why isn't this bump stock accessory banned? So it came out that the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which, side note, I don't know why alcohol and tobacco and firearms are like in the same department.
Because they're a bad mixture.
Anyways, apparently it was under the Obama administration that they ruled like the bump stock accessory or add-on thing was not covered under like the automatic ban.
Right.
They
Well,
revealed
and
it like an accessory, not a firearm. So they,
Right.
up until this point, they viewed it as like something you add. It's not a firearm. It's not like a weapon in and of itself. So I can see why they would make that distinction, but like seeing now like the capabilities. Most
right.
Americans, I had never heard of this thing.
Oh, I'd never
and, like,
heard of it
a lot
either.
of people are like, I've never heard about this until now. And so I think it's coming to like the forefront of national conversation. And I think now maybe we might see some more laws and things to restrict it.
This afternoon the NRA says it supports regulation of the bump stock, which is a big step forward. That's shocking.
Huge.
Absolutely shocking.
That is huge.
From
the NRA never comes out, and I mean never comes out and supports gun control legislation.
Anything. They always say no. Like, I was listening to something about them.
Never.
And
like,
they
never.
literally, they're so successful because they only say no to things. They never say yes to anything. They never support anything. They always say no.
They're super powerful.
Yeah.
Whenever anyone even thinks the word gun control, they're there.
Oh, yeah.
And they're loud and they have a lot of money.
Yeah.
So this is groundbreaking that they would come out and say, like, we are supportive of, like, considering this.
Because somebody was saying something, and you read that article that you sent me was really important. It was an alternative perspective on gun control a little bit, and he said something so impactful. He said that if this man had knives or bow and arrow, or he had anything else, the casualties here, it may not have been preventable, but the casualties would not have been as high. No. Because he was shooting from so far up and lost the strip. It was on the strip, and the strip is so open that there's like really nothing you can hide behind. And when you hear shooting, you hit the ground, right? Like, that's usually the way that you can be safe. But and he was so far up that there was no hiding from it if you were laying on the ground. But the stories that have come out of it, of people who had just met not even 24 hours before, trying to find each other and protecting each other and
like
saving each other,
people,
right? And husbands who died protecting their wives. And so I read the story about a young man who he had just met this young woman. Her name was Michelle Vo, and I can't remember his name, but she got shot and in the chest, and he had her phone in her purse, and he would not stop looking for her. And her brother-in-law was also looking for her, and he had called the phone and talked to this young man, and the two of them were working really hard, and he walked to every hospital he could find and then stood there and waited until the doctors came out and said that she's gone. And he then this young man then waited for the family to fly out and accept her belongings and worked with them. And I mean, just the absolute stories of heroism and
well, after like the day of, like, the lines for donating blood in Vegas were like blocks long, and like people like flooded these blood donations.
Yeah.
They finally had to like turn people away because they got so much overwhelming support. And there was a GoFundMe set up in behalf of the victims. It raised over $3 million in 24 hours. Wow. Like, and if you know, like Kickstarter, like crowdfunding, that is like crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you never raise that much in 24 hours. That was like insanely ridiculous. Like, it's just amazing to see.
Yeah.
Like, everyone coming together.
And Utah sent trauma counselors.
Yeah, Utah has been like sending people.
Yeah.
Personnel.
Because they don't have enough trauma counselors, and they don't. I mean, the hospitals, they only have one center in right there, and so all of the hospitals were completely inundated with people because it was over 500 people, and it was amazing.
One quick note, going back to the bump stock thing, the talk of legislation. So I said, like, Trump and the administration has like said, like, no, we'll talk about this later. Until today, Sarah Sanders said in her press briefing, like, they were open to the idea to talk about it.
Yeah.
They want to be involved in the conversation, and they're open to considering it.
Yeah. So
that was like the first sign that, like, oh, like, they're actually gonna, up until now they've just swatted away the question, like, no, we'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
But now they're like open to talking about it.
The conversation's been interesting too around this one, where people are saying, how after every mass shooting like this, we're saying thoughts and prayers are with the victims, right? And some people have been saying that's not enough anymore. Like I can't remember who it was. It was one of the Congress people. I don't remember who it was. I think it was a woman. I don't remember. She was saying that, Like, I thought we would act after Columbine. I thought we would act after...
I think that was Dianne Feinstein.
I think it was. I thought we would act after Virginia Tech. I thought we would act after Sandy Hook, and we didn't. I thought we would act after Orlando, and we didn't. And now I'm asking... And she's the one who's introduced the bump stock legislation, too.
Right.
And now
she's been advocating for gun control ever since she's become a senator.
Yeah, because bump stocks are actually, again, like, they're outlawed in California. And she's from California.
But not Nevada.
But not Nevada, right? And so there's just this, like, this bigger rhetoric that, like, we can't keep seeing that this is the biggest mass shooting in American history.
No.
Like, we can't keep seeing that. And so what are we going to do about it?
Well, and that was, like, one of the biggest regrets and biggest, like, stumbling blocks to the Obama administration. Was, like, they could not get gun control.
Yeah.
They couldn't get anything done. They could not get legislation
It's such a partisan issue,
passed.
and the NRA is so
powerful.
So powerful, and especially with respects to whose campaigns they fund. Actually, one of the top 3 senators that they fund is Mia Love.
I did see that. Yeah, Politico released like an interactive thing. You could, like, see how much money from the gun lobby your representatives have gotten.
Yeah, and Mia Love is the 3rd highest in the nation, which is just very interesting.
I didn't know she, like, ever talked about guns or, like, felt that strongly about it.
I didn't either.
So that kind of surprised me.
Yeah. It's also very interesting is that there was a big, like, flashback against calling Paddock a terrorist, which is because we, like... In the Orlando one, he was considered a terrorist. ISIS actually claimed Paddock and said he converted to Islam.
Did they?
The first thing they said was 2 months, and then their newspaper came out this week and they said 6 months, or the end of this week and it said 6 months, which is ridiculous. There's no evidence that he
radicalized,
converted to Islam. Period.
Oh.
But the reason that we're not calling him a terrorist is because terrorism, as defined by the United States government, is violence that is perpetrated to create terror on the behalf of, to push a political agenda or ideology, right? Not just political, but a political agenda or an ideology. And so Orlando was a terrorist act because he espoused it and was trying to spread an ideology that was terrorist, right? Or that was radical, and that's what his purpose was. With Paddock, we don't know. We don't know what his motive was.
He was, like, his brother was, like, shocked beyond all belief.
And so was his mom.
That, like, he had done this.
And like, his girlfriend is like, I didn't know this.
Like,
and
he was just a normal guy. He has, like, no history. I read, like, he hasn't even ever gotten a speeding ticket. Like,
yeah, not in Mesquite, at least.
Yeah, like,
which is where he was living for
his legal
the last
record was, like, pretty clean. He was just, like, an average dude.
Yeah, which just goes to show, like somebody the article again said, like, if he didn't...
We'll share that article.
Yeah,
it had a really good perspective.
So good. Anyway, so the thing about this is that we can't label him a terrorist until we know his motives, because terrorism isn't defined by what kind of violence or how much damage you do. It's defined by what your motives are, and we don't know his motives.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, terrorism is really hard to define. Like, sit in a class of political science students when a teacher says, so how do we define terrorism? And everybody has a different definition, and everyone has a different idea of what consists of terrorism. And so when you boil it down, the one for the DHS is that it is violence that is perpetrated to create terror on behalf in pushing a particular ideology or agenda, political agenda. And so by that definition, we don't know yet. So that's just a really important point. And I think that there's so much more we could talk about, but we need to end there.
I think one quick note on this. Trump went and visited Las Vegas on Wednesday.
Oh, yes.
And it was interesting. It was the day after his trip to Puerto Rico, and he was like
not good.
So different. He was he was much more scripted, much more controlled, like very consoling. He went and visited people in the hospital and was like hugging them. And
there's a really inspiring video of a man who got shot in the leg who said that if I'm going to be in the presence of my president, I'm going to stand. And he did. It was really cool.
That was cool.
It was really cool.
So Trump did go there. So, I mean, kudos to him for, like, you know, going 2 days back to back, kind of being like the consoler in chief, which is not the favorite part of the president.
Did one part as consoler in chief.
But I mean, that's not the funnest part about being president.
It's definitely
is having
not.
to react to these types of events.
Right.
It's necessary, but it's definitely not the funnest part.
Right.
So kudos to him for being there.
There's a reason why presidents go gray.
Yes.
So, speaking of presidents that have gone gray, it was Michelle and Barack's 25th anniversary this weekend. It was super cute. They were super cute. All right, soapbox this week is how Facebook is turning into Twitter. And
Facebook is just...
will lead into how much I hate the new icons for both. So, the first thing is that Facebook is turning into Twitter. Which is... Well, Facebook is turning into everything.
They're copying
Let's
Snapchat.
Be honest.
We've covered that before.
We've covered all of that. But now... So, a couple months ago, Twitter changed its, icons. Their interface, everything. So, they went round... And they changed their line art on, the little notifications button and the home button, all of that stuff, which I'm not a huge fan of that line art. I think it seems a little bit... It
seems hokey.
It is. It seems too cutesy.
Yeah.
And
I totally agree.
I don't like it. So then, a month and a half later, if that... Facebook rolls out their new updates. They've moved to circular profiles, which are just the worst in the world. You can't...
Everyone's profile pictures look bad.
Everyone's do. Everybody's
especially
pictures look
institutional
better.
accounts, corporate accounts and things.
You have to figure out how to fit your logo just right, and it's ridiculous. It's a pain. And they also then move to this new line art, which I just absolutely despise with all of my being. Every time I open my Facebook app, I was telling you guys earlier, I cringe just because it's so bad. It is so, so, so bad.
And you'd think Facebook is the behemoth of social media.
Right.
They don't need to copy everyone.
No.
They don't need to keep up with, they have
absolutely
millions, probably billions of users at this point. They don't need to copy everybody. Be your own person. Be your own character. I don't need you copying everybody in the neighborhood.
No,
you know what I mean?
I want you to be someone else. Well, and on the topic of really poorly designed line art, not just Facebook and Twitter, but the new Apple update.
Yeah, iOS 11.
Their new Apple...
It's more hokey, too.
Yeah, it's more hokey and more... it seems juvenile. Yeah. It just seems like a 3-year-old sat down and was not a 3-year-old, because they don't draw like that.
Yeah, that seems a little young.
But, somebody just sat down and was oh yeah, a bunch of, ovals, that's fine. I don't know. It just... I'm not a fan of this new graphic designer style. But I can appreciate that they worked probably really hard on these, but I just don't appreciate it. I worked with too many good graphic designers who came up with some really cool things, and I think that a graphic designer could do so much more with all of this. So, without going overboard.
Got it out.
Yeah, well, for now.
All right.
Until Facebook collapse something from someone else.
Which they're bound to do at this point. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for our episode of Pop Politics. Next week, we will feature our discussion and analysis on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, because by this point next week, I will have finished it and watched the movie. So stay tuned for that. Our kind of semi-frequent series of analyzing the Harry Potter books as I finish them. So we will do that next week. Thanks for joining.